You're listening to The Women in the Arena. I'm your host, Paige, former collegiate athlete turned leadership entrepreneur for women just like you. Each week, I'm bringing you a new person or message to help you expand and elevate into the woman you know you're meant to be. Now, let's step into the arena. Hey guys, today I'm so excited to talk to you about all things Enneagram. If you've never heard of the Enneagram, you are going to want to tune in, listen in, turn the volume up. This is one of the most impactful tools, if not the most impactful tool that I've ever come across, both personally and professionally. It has quite literally changed the way that I coach. It has elevated my coaching style with my clients. It's made me closer in my relationships. And furthermore, it has eliminated the need to be right and really strengthened the need to understand other people. I am coming off of a week where I got to lead an Enneagram workshop for the governor's office, and it was really incredible. And it was such a dream come true, and hopefully the first of many, because I got to share something that's been really, really powerful for me that actually I found organically. And so I'm going to tell you guys the backstory, how I came to find the Enneagram, why it's going to be so helpful for you. And then this is just going to be like the tip of the iceberg, just to kind of get your feet wet. And I'll start offering these workshops both digitally and in person. So if you're interested, you know where to find me over on LinkedIn or jump in the Rise Facebook community to hear more. So the Enneagram, if you don't know it, first of all, I'm the visual person that needs to know. It's Enneagram. So Ennea is a Greek word for 9, gram, graph. So a visual is basically a circle with 9 different numbers around the circumference of the circle. The Enneagram can be very challenging in full transparency because it's not like your regular personality assessment. And I don't even like to call it a personality assessment. I really call it a motivation assessment, because when I was playing softball at North Carolina, I was on a leadership committee, and we would take DISC, Myers-Briggs. I took something called Voices. I've taken an assessment on what your color is. And a lot of it is like your working style amongst a team. And that's really important to understand. But with those tests, you can input answers to your questions and you get a very clear result. You're either a series of letters or you're a specific letter, you're a letter combination, and there's never any gray area. It's like, this is clearly what you are. And some people that don't like these assessments feel like they're really being boxed in. And one of the reasons I love the Enneagram is because it's helping you step outside of your box, because every one of us has a natural reaction to a stimulus. So for example, if one of your friends didn't call you on your birthday, that could be a stimulus, and your response could be upset at that friend. Okay. Or even like somebody cuts you off and your natural reaction is to honk the horn. Not everybody's natural reaction is to do that. But when you are used to that same like conditioning and patterning in your decision making and in your behavior, it feels like it's very natural. So the Enneagram is a way to help you create distance and more of a gap between the stimulus and the response, because you understand what your natural inclination is and why you naturally respond in a certain way. And with that gap, you have space to make a decision that's more in line with where you want to be or getting things done in an efficient way, if it's about a relationship with a family member or a working relationship or things of that nature. And so I find it extremely, extremely valuable for that reason. And then a little bit of backstory that I learned when I was developing the workshop is that around the ages of 3 or 4, the human psyche will start to disassociate from anything that feels unsafe to us. So for example, if we're somebody who is constantly criticized when we're younger, again, around ages 3 or 4, we might start to develop that internal voice that's a critic, and we develop perfectionistic tendencies because we're trying to stay safe and not get criticized. And then there's other people who, when they're younger, learn in some capacity that in order to stay safe, they have to exert a lot of power and intensity, and they're seen as more bold, and they know that it's not safe to share anything vulnerable, or that's what they feel. And so if you're familiar with the Enneagram, I'm sure you can guess the numbers that I'm referencing here, but that's just a way that we as humans learn to cope. You guys, I could go on. And so I'm just trying to give you as best of a brief overview as I can. But the other thing I find so fascinating is we are pretty much every different number to some capacity. I mean, the Enneagram does a great job at acknowledging the human complexity, right? It's not like there's billions of people that can fit into 9 numbers very cleanly, but your core motivation is not going to change, and it's going to be very consistent. But that is different than your behavior. And the Greek word for mask is persona, from the word personality. And we can wear a lot of different masks, right? Like, think about social settings in high school. Maybe you wore one mask to fit in with one group better than the other group. Like, I remember being in theater, and my conversations in theater were a little bit different than my conversations when I was on the volleyball court or on the softball field. And so we get really good at wearing different masks in different environments. And so the behavior doesn't always reflect what your Enneagram number is. So it's not easy to just look at someone and say, oh, well, there's totally a 2, or there's such a 3, or that person's definitely a 1. It's not so easy to say that, and experts don't advise you to do that. But when you really get to know a person, that person is the only person that can really identify their type. They get to say, hey, this is actually my number because this is my internal motivation, right? So that's just an overview of the Enneagram, but I'll tell you how I first found it. I can't exactly remember the year. It had to have been either 2018 or 2019. I decided to join a book club because I really valued and needed friendships. And I was in that awkward stage of, I had some work colleagues, and I was out of college where I was always with a team. And I was, in my early 20s, and I was like, gosh, I really just need to find friends. And so I joined this book club, and the book we happened to be reading was called The Road Back to You by Suzanne Stable and Ian Crone. And it was an Enneagram book, and it was a faith-based Enneagram book. Now, I will say there is conflicting information about where the Enneagram got its start. Some Christian theologists think it was a way to help Christians get closer in their relationship with Christ. And then there's some early psychologists trace back to different areas of the world who have used it differently. And so this particular book was used in a faith-based way. And so I started reading it, and I never took an Enneagram test, but I started reading the book, and it started with type 8 and then went to type 9 and then type 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And I kept reading it, and I was like, wow. Reading this book, it was so evident, some people that were really, really close to me, what I thought that they were. And I know I just said that it's really hard to type somebody else, and it definitely is, but I'm talking about people that were extremely close to me at the time. And it really helped me understand them. And it was so insightful, you guys. I was blown away. But I got to the end of the book, and I started thinking, man, maybe I'm an anomaly, because I definitely haven't read about myself. And then I got to the chapter about my number towards the end of the book, and I felt exposed. I think that's the best way to describe it. I felt uncomfortable. I felt exposed. I felt like somebody was in my head reading my thoughts. And with all of the personality assessments and quizzes that I had taken for years, I spent 11 years in Division I softball. I hadn't come across anything that felt that invasive, if you will. And so that's where my love for the Enneagram really developed. And at the time I was using it personally, I was going through personal growth. I was really early on in my business. I was trying to navigate relationships, and, you're in your 20s, and a lot of things are up in the air. You're trying to figure out who you are. So it was very, very instrumental for me. I also started to understand my familial relationships a little bit different. And it was really like a tool that almost felt like I had access to a manual of other people in my life. And so a lot of times we read from our own manuals and our own ways of thinking and feeling and behaving. the Enneagram explains why we think, feel, and behave in a certain way. And I remember just seeing this manual and treating each number like a manual and understanding people in my life so much better. And it helped me take a little bit of like the personal feeling out of things and really just look at something for face value. And I also started becoming more curious about understanding other people versus trying to be right or wrong or making something mean more than it really was. And so that really was instrumental in relationships and especially in building a business, because it's easy to take things personal when someone's like, wow, your prices are really high, or no, I don't want to work with you, or, you know, all of the challenges that come with being an entrepreneur, especially in the early stages. You guys, when I first started my entrepreneurial journey, I had very few examples of women in leadership positions. And sometimes when I shared what I was building with my friends or with my coworkers at the time, they just didn't really get it. Even when I wanted to create some new goals and talk about those ambitions, I didn't feel like I had a community of women to share that with, which is why I found an online community of other multi-passionate, like-minded women. If you can relate, join us in our Rise Facebook community where you get free weekly coaching, a network of amazing women who are also in the arena, and you're the first to know about the latest offers. Women leaders rise together. See you inside our Rise Facebook community. You can find the link in the show notes. So I started getting into just learning more about the Enneagram. And then fast forward, when I started to get more clients on the books and started to move my business more in a space where I would take it full time, I really leaned on the Enneagram to help me navigate how to motivate certain people. And that was really important, right? So some people really value knowing what decisions are going to lead to security, where other people really value knowing that they're helping other people because that's like their number one drive, right? And so as a high performance coach, my job is always to help my clients get from island A to island B. Island B is really anywhere they want to be and anything they desire to create, whether that's your ideal relationship, whether that is a lifestyle, whether that is a health goal, mental, emotional, physical, or a career change or launching a business. Like high achieving women and really high achieving people, because I do work with men in general, helping them get where they want to go and understanding their natural inclinations, their tendencies, and their motivations is a really useful tool. And so it helped me a ton when it came to my coaching. And so I would use it really often. And when I got the opportunity a couple months ago to lead this Enneagram workshop in a huge space and for some really big leaders in our state, I decided that the only thing I could do was dive right in. And so I pulled together some resources. I ended up selling myself on the opportunity, which was amazing. And I dug in, you guys. Like I got laser focused and I consumed a lot of books and a lot of podcasts and was lucky enough to have some people in my world who were willing to share their experience in other workshops. And this is kind of a side note, but a little bit of a lesson in like business and confidence. But I knew that I trusted myself to figure it out. While I didn't consider myself like an Enneagram workshop expert, I do consider myself an expert in the coaching piece of things, like presenting and creating a space where people can collaborate and learn. And so I knew and trusted that ability. It was more of like filling in the meat and potatoes of, okay, how do we want to talk about an Enneagram in like a 3-hour session that really has an impact on that team and the leadership on the team and like them being able to work together to trust one another and in a very cohesive way. And so started really diving in on that, and it was instrumental. And so what I did was I taught each different number. And if you're somebody listening to this and you're like, I'm so curious, I want to know what my Enneagram number is, I don't know what it is, definitely recommend going to the Enneagram Institute and taking the RETI, RHETI test. It's $12. It's 40 minutes. It's 144 questions, but it's very, very valuable. And I want you to keep in mind that if you're going to take the test, tests are about 70% accurate. Again, this is why the Enneagram can be frustrating, because what I've found in the people that I've worked with, and it's probably a handful of like 50, I would say, as far as like seeing Enneagram results, I would say about 50% are very clear with what their number is. And it's like, okay, I'm definitely nothing else. This is exactly what my number is. And then there's like 50% that are not really sure because they've taken a test before and they've tested in one way and they got the test back. And so some questions that I get that I think will be helpful for you are, can I have more than one Enneagram number? And the answer is no, you definitely have one number. But if you have been through something extremely traumatic, a very, very traumatic life experience, that is the only thing that can change what that Enneagram number might be. And mostly if that traumatic experience is in childhood. So that is the only way. Otherwise, the reason that you might have tested one number in the past and one number now is sometimes your behavior can change based on where you're at in your life. So, for example, every number has a stress path, meaning the behavior they exhibit when they're in seasons of stress. And every number has a growth path, which is the behavior they exhibit in times of growth. So an Enneagram 1, for example, there's a lot of different names, but it's called the reformer or the perfectionist. And in times of growth, an Enneagram 1 looks like an Enneagram 7, a very healthy Enneagram 7. So they're more spontaneous and they're more flexible with themselves and have more grace with themselves. And so that's what that looks like in times of growth for them. In a stress path, an Enneagram 1 moves towards an Enneagram 4, but an unhealthy version of an Enneagram 4. So every number has a healthy, average, and unhealthy version of themselves. And that's why, again, there's so many nuances to the Enneagram. And the more I learn, the more I need to learn, basically. But that one in an unhealthy 4 behavior starts to retract, starts to really isolate themselves. They're thinking that there's something with them missing, that they can't connect with other people at times. And so that's really what that looks like. So even though that one's internal motivation is not going to change and they're an Enneagram 1, they can exhibit behaviors of another personality type or like another Enneagram number based on the season they're in. So if you're taking the test and you're at work and you're super stressed and you're trying to rush it, yeah, there's a chance that your results could look differently than if you're taking it at home and you're in a relaxed environment. And so that's where that can show up. But I'll be honest, for me, I've always been a very, very clear number. And I think it might be because I read the book. That is what is recommended, is to type yourself that way. But a lot of people do like to take tests. I mean, myself included. And so if you're somebody that's going to go take a test or you want to read back on your results, just know that you're the only one that can decide what you are. And so the Enneagram Institute's test will come back and maybe have you a tie between 2 numbers. And there's a lot of resources on the website, but the way that they give you the information is, for example, they're like, okay, your top 3 numbers are a 7, 8, and a 3. And that's just because the test is scientifically validated. And what I think is that each testing number is associated with an Enneagram number to some extent. And that's how they draw those values. So basically, you'll take your top 3 numbers and then read further in the PDF that they give you so that you can really type yourself and pay attention. And it might not happen overnight. Like I said, that's kind of one of the frustrating things about the Enneagram is you're like, well, wait a minute. I don't really know what I am right away, because that can sometimes be the case. But like I said, it is such a valuable resource and I couldn't not recommend it again and again. And this will be something that I'll use in part of my coaching forever because it is that valuable. And then I had somebody actually DM me recently and said that there's a book by the same authors as The Road Back to You called The Path Between Us. And that's about relationships and navigating relationships. And so the Enneagram does so much more than what I just described. It goes into, one, how to work on a team. Understanding yourself gives you so much grace to understand other people, gives you more self-compassion, and then in turn you have compassion for other people. That's a really big deal. Can also give you takeaways as far as like how to work better as your number or challenges for your number. An Enneagram 6, for an example, is called the loyalist. And the way that they think is basically when in a working scenario, they're looking for gaps where things could go wrong. And that's very valuable if you're somebody working in compliance, for example, right? Because you want to make sure that there's no litigation that falls on your team or your company. And so they are really good at one, seeing the big picture and dialing down into the details, and also having plan A, B, C, D, E, and they can see problems coming from every different direction. However, sometimes they'll abuse their gift, use it too much, and they can be looking for problems where problems don't actually exist. So that's one way that they can be challenged, is to make sure that when they're looking for gaps, they're balancing that out with also recognizing opportunities, because a lot of times they'll default to seeing the obstacles. And so that's been a really valuable resource for a lot of the Enneagram 6s I work with. And furthermore, like I said, it's just so valuable to learn about yourself, because when you learn about yourself, your habits, what you do in times of stress, what you do in times of growth, it gives you the tools to almost trick yourself. It gives you the tools to not just act on your behavior and your natural inclination, but to create more of a gap between that stimulus and your response, so that you're acting in a way that's going to keep you moving in a direction you want to be. And so that is very helpful. I mean, if you're an Enneagram 8, for example, it feels less safe to be vulnerable. But that is a big part of growing in a team, is like being able to come into a workspace and talk a little bit more about yourself and open up, because that allows other people to open up. And it's just very, very valuable. Also, if you're a leader in an organization, there are people who want to communicate in a way where you just cut to the chase and you're like, hey, here's what I need from you. Where's that report? And the person on the other end of that really receives that information well and is very task oriented and wants to get that done. Whereas there's other numbers that really want that rapport, like, hey, good morning. How was your weekend? Did you try that recipe? Or if you're meeting somebody new and you notice a photo on their wall and you're like, oh, that looks beautiful. Like, when did you travel to Italy, or whatever that may be? And so it's important to know, how other people operate, because you can get to the goal quicker that way. Really good for conflict too. So again, I could go on and on. When we talk about Enneagram, each number has a wing to the right or the left. So a 9, for example, is either a wing 8 or a wing 1. You can never be a wing that's not directly beside you. So if you get your test results back from that Enneagram Institute and it says your top 3 numbers are like a 7, 5, and 3, none of those are your wings, because they're not next to each other, right? Next to a 7 is a 6 and an 8. Next to a 3 is a 4 and a 2, and so on. So those aren't your wings. Those are just maybe what your number could be. But your wings will play a part in your behavior. And then there's also different coping styles for different groups of numbers. And there's different ways that different groups of numbers make decisions. Some are more thinking numbers, like 5, 6, and 7, and 8, 9, and 1 are more like moving, like they feel in their bodies. A 2, 3, and 4 are more heart-centered. And so those are some different nuances that you can learn. And again, like I said, I've really done a lot of digging recently, and I'm sharing it with you because I think it's such a valuable tool. And you'll hear me talk about it on the podcast too. And I can't help but interview different women in the arena. And I think, well, what is your Enneagram number? And it's more out of just curiosity. And the more you learn, the more you realize, like, hey, people behave in a lot of different ways, but you can typically, with their help, identify what the driving factor is for that. Now, I didn't purposely tell you guys my number on here because I really do like to use it in different workshops. So if you're planning on taking a workshop, sometimes I'll have people type me. The governor's office did a great job at asking questions to type me, and that was really fun. And so I think that would actually be kind of fun if you guys are listening to this, or if you know me and you don't know my Enneagram number and you're interested in looking. Love to hear what you think my number is, because I think that's really fun. So be on the lookout for Enneagram workshops. The best way to keep up with me is on Instagram. That is my home base. And then I share inside information in the Rise Facebook community, totally free, and just a network of high achieving women rising together. So hope you guys have an awesome rest of your week, and go check out a little bit more of the Enneagram. See you next time. I hope today's episode inspired you on your journey in the arena. Make sure to check out the show notes in the description for a rundown of today's show with all the important links. If you enjoyed this, please share with a friend. I know how much it means to me when my friends share podcasts. Leave us a review and let us know it landed with you over on Instagram at Paige_Renee15. As always, your best bet is on yourself.